So the housekeeping is, my name is pronounced amped man, like an excited guy, an amped man. Yeah, it's one of 3 jokes that I will make today, and I'm told that this clicker will advance slides. Okay, so about 7 years ago, Mayor Iveson had an idea about us as a community ending poverty, and so he did the thing that mayors do when they have great ideas. He created a mayoral task force. Like REACH, back then, Mayor Stephen Mandel created a task force to end crime in our city. And so we were born out of this mayor's idea. The task force created what was called a roadmap, and it was the first 5 years of this organization. The roadmap had a series of activities that we were to do to put us on a path to ending poverty in a generation. And if there's one clever thing that they did, it wasn't the roadmap, it was giving the generational timeline, because these things are big and scary and very, very difficult to do in the modern world that's not been done. And so if Edmonton's going to figure it out, it's good that we're giving ourselves some time to figure that, and not demanding like results tomorrow. Because to do something this big, you need massive systems changes to occur for poverty to, one, start being reduced and eventually become eliminated. The roadmap was coming to an end, and so that's when I was asked if I would be interested in doing the job. And in like this is my second joke, just to get ready. In the best interview moment where I dropped the mic and walked away, I said, if that's the plan and this is the job description and we're going to do it in this way, then don't hire me. But if you want to end poverty, I'm your guy. And they did. And so I very quickly realized that that was a lot of bravo and naivety. And I quickly learned that I needed to figure something out, because where I thought we needed to go wasn't exactly what the organization needed to do. It needed to pivot from a series of activities that would have been very positive about poverty reduction, but probably not had any results. Things like making anti-racism videos. So what we did is we restructured all of the work of EndPoverty Edmonton around 8 game changers. We didn't have the resources to tackle all 8 of those game changers, so we were selective in saying, where is there a place for an organization like EndPoverty to play in this space? What can we do that? What can we do that others can't? And the reason I was attracted to EndPoverty Edmonton was, having come from the Edmonton Mennonite Center for Newcomers, I was always doing policy work on the side of my desk. You'd see the cycle of people coming in and out of the organization with the exact same issues, and you would help them navigate the system. Or you would do something like work around the system, or you'd find that really great worker who would always sort of bend the rules to help a client. So we structured our work around these game changers. If you did these 8 things, you would eliminate poverty. And we picked a couple that we thought we could make a really big difference in, because there either weren't a lot of people in that space, or it was people like me in my previous job doing it at the side of my desk. In this job at EndPoverty Edmonton, you get to do this stuff right front and center. It's what we exist to do. I've already talked without slides, I'm just kind of going through things. We started with these 7 game changers and added an 8th. And the 8th was indigenization. So it's a recognition that Indigenous people are overrepresented in just about any negative statistic you can think of: poverty, homelessness, incarceration, child welfare. And so we felt that it was really important to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into our work. Interestingly, there's no Cree word for poverty. So while in the modern era, no country, no community has really figured out how to address poverty, you've got communities, historic communities that had figured out how to live without poverty. The only thing I'll point out here, in addition to the Indigenous sort of leaning, is that we're talking about system barriers. And so it's about systems change. If you put up your hand and say, I need some help, what the system right now is really designed around is the principle of 1% or 2% of people are going to be cheating. We need to catch them. We're not designing around the 99% that need this support and have no intention of abusing the system. A CERB is a system that was designed around helping everybody who needed help. So they had a lot less rules. The barriers to access were much, much less. If you try to get social housing, there are so many rules to prevent you from getting social housing. So you can't own a car if you want to have social housing. You have to sell off your car. Once your bank account has been depleted, now you would qualify. Say you have a child who wants to go to NATE. You have to evict them from your household or lose your housing. It's a scoring system. And so there's 7,000 households roughly on our social housing wait list. If you're number 5,000, you'll never get to one. It's not a queue, it's not a lineup. You don't sort of move up. You stay at 5,000 forever. And so it's not designed to help people. It's giving them a false hope. You need to change the systems in order to really get at the causes of poverty. We're, as a community, very good at managing the symptoms of poverty. Not always with the greatest results, but that's generally what we're good at doing. But we could create a system that is very good at addressing the root causes of those problems. Child welfare is a really easy one to pick on. Child welfare is designed to keep kids safe, and it keeps them physically safe. They're taken out of a home where there is an element of danger and put into a space that is, for the most part, safe. But it causes a lot of trauma to kids, and so our child welfare system is also very good at creating homeless 19-year-olds. It's not an intended consequence, but it does that with great success. And so how do you change the system so that it's about creating outcomes that we really want? So those of you who are a parent, you probably want your kids to go to school, to get university degrees. But if your child is the state, so if you're a ward of the state, that doesn't seem to be a goal of the province of Alberta for you. And so how do we change the system so that it's wanting you to succeed? I won't abandon my child at 19. She will continue to benefit from me as a parent. If you're a ward of the state, that's no longer the case. And so why wouldn't we change the rules? Why wouldn't we let our social workers continue to interact with kids when they're 20 and 25 and 28 if they need the help in those spaces in their life? So it's about changing the system. These are the game changers I mentioned. Oh, I thought we had one per slide. So indigenization is really about indigenizing our work and trying to bring an Indigenous lens to policymakers. So having more advisors in positions of trust, advising our premiers, our mayors, our community leaders. We have staff in this space, and in particular, the initiative that we're working on is the development of an Indigenous Culture and Wellness Center. So an iconic space in our river valley, hopefully, that allows Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people access to culture. So for Indigenous people, access to culture that they haven't had access to because of how they grew up, where they grew up. And so it's an Indigenous culture center in Edmonton. And for those of us who aren't Indigenous, it's an opportunity to be in a space where you can learn about Indigenous culture in a positive way. Having worked for a newcomer organization, there's an assumption when you come to Canada that the culture of this nation is the First Nation, because that's generally how it is elsewhere, and it will be a greatly celebrated culture. Indigenous people, newcomers to Canada, quickly are told that that is not the case, and they are then introduced to visual cues that reinforce stereotypes that they shouldn't see. A really interesting initiative that we did with the Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society was to have Indigenous drummers greet Syrian refugees at the airport. And within a year, I was seeing in our daycares, like little girls doing jingle dances. We'd taken people to powwows, and the conversation in our language centers was really positive. And when a relative would say, "Oh, Indigenous people are stereotype A, B, and C," that person would say, "Well, no, like there's an elder in my classroom the other day, and they were talking to me about, what an eagle feather is." And it changes the conversation because your stereotype is defeated by your experience. And so it's trying to create more of that in our community, trying to do it in a bigger way so that it can affect more people. Anti-racism is another one of the other four that we're leaning into. So it's very difficult to do policy work or get at systemic racism especially in a Canadian context. So the big initiative we're leading here is the collection of race-based data. We work with the Edmonton public school system, who's now collecting race-based data, and they'll be able to start identifying how race is playing out within their school system and what systemic racism looks like, and then what their interventions are doing to address racism within the school system. At that table, AHS is looking at doing this, the police are looking at doing this. All the big systems players are starting to say we need to be able to collect race-based data so we can understand the interplay between our system and race. We know that there's likely an issue. In fact, there's very few who would argue there isn't, but we don't know what it looks like. In Canada, we're very polite on this issue. Like, we're very shy about race. It's something that we don't like. I think my generation grew up with, I would get that question of where are you from? And I think we've sort of gone so far the other way to be we can't talk about that stuff. It's just leave it off the table. Whereas you got to put it on the table. You've got to talk about it. You've got to see what it looks like for racialized people in our systems. Transportation is not one that we have done too much with, other than trying to support regional transit, which seems to be in its dying days, unfortunately. Health was another one where we felt there's so many people in here. It's such a big system. We can try to move the Titanic, but that's the moon. And so for a little player like us, our energy is probably better spent elsewhere. Early learning and care is one that we've taken on as one of our sort of core pieces of work. There's a federal provincial funding agreement. Right now that agreement is set up really to make for cheap childcare for the next 5 years. That should not be the legacy. We can create a system of childcare that does more than childcare, that focuses on early learning, that builds up the children, the families, and their families. And so we're trying to work with both those levels of government as well as the municipality to figure out how to create a better system of childcare, how to eliminate the childcare deserts that exist in our city, how to get people access to that affordable childcare. And the fourth one that we are spending a lot of our energy in is inclusive economy work. It's a word that is not that well known, I don't think, so I'll bear with me as I try to explain it a little bit. We have an economy that works really, really well for most people, really well. It's great. But there's collateral damage to the way we structured our system, and that's mostly people in poverty who are mostly the working poor. So you've got the vast majority of people who live in poverty working 1, 2, 3 jobs, and that's to survive. And so what can we change in our economy so that that really hard-working person who's probably trying to do this for the next generation, how do we help that household thrive? So things in this space we're doing, how do you move that hardworking job from a minimum wage job to a high-paying job, and maybe a high-paying, lower-skilled job? The trades are a pretty obvious one. You can come into a work site as a laborer and within 2 years have a red seal ticket and be making, $80,000 a year. You're doing different work. You're probably not working as hard actually, but you're making more money. And so how do we make more pathways? Employers are struggling to find workers. There's a steel company that could add 60 staff tomorrow if they could find the workers. They just don't have the connections, because what they do is they go to a pool of traditional steel workers, and that pool is getting much older and much smaller. And so how do you bring more people into that pool, like Indigenous people, like youth, like newcomers, like women? What systems do we need to create to support them to get access to those jobs that for many years they've sort of not had access to? And the other one that we're giving quite a bit of time to is livable wages. So there are employers in our city who pay a living wage, which means you've got enough to pay for what you and your family might need to not just survive, but do well or thrive. I think in Edmonton we're at 21 something an hour. It's not a really wild number relative to minimum wage. It's higher, meaningfully higher, I know, but how do we create a community that values that? When I talk to, in particular, food industry, they'll say they can't pay a living wage because of what it does to the cost of their food. And so how do you help a consumer understand that I'm going to pay 50 cents more for a hamburger, but that worker who just made my meal and served me, he or she is not worried about where the next meal is coming for their family? How do we change our culture to do that? Former Councillor Ben Henderson wrote a blog post on sort of that when we don't think about those things, and frankly, we all benefit from from people who are struggling to make ends meet, struggling to get by, struggling with these jobs that don't pay well, and we benefit from that. So are we able to look in the mirror and say, let's take some time, let's make that change for ourselves personally, and how would that look different? I'm trying to think about a good. Does anybody know Knifeware on White Avenue? Very sharp Japanese knives. They're a living wage employer. The city of Edmonton is a living wage employer, so they don't employ anybody who makes less than that. ATB is actually a living wage employer, but there's some issues with certification because you've got very expensive communities where the living wage is like $40 an hour versus the living wage in communities like Edmonton. So those are the game changers that we're really focused on, where we're putting a lot of time and energy. Our goal is to really be at the table. So to be a trusted advisor to those people who are making decisions, to have the ear of Jeremy Nixon to talk about housing affordability, which happened last week, or Amarjeet Sohi to tell him to talk to his colleagues about this child care agreement between the federal and provincial government, how it could change to really benefit more people, to talk to the ministers of labor and education. There's a requirement for us to create 40,000 new childcare spaces. That's about 10,000 new jobs. We don't have a plan for that. So not only may the spaces not be created, jobs won't get created, and it's a missed opportunity for us. People like us, people in our position can see these things, but usually we don't have the time or energy to go to those people who can actually influence to say, hey, can you do this? And so EndPoverty Edmonton tries to play that role, to be a voice for those who don't have the time to get into that room, to make those cases for more long-term thinking. And hopefully that's our shot, that's Edmonton's shot at doing something really spectacular. I can say these initiatives exist across the country. I would say Edmonton, our city council, this one and the previous one, have positioned this organization, our organization, to take the best shot possible at doing this, and a long runway to get there. So I have to think less about ending poverty tomorrow and more about what I'm going to do when I'm holding the baton. And now I know the next slide is questions.